In this day and age, we're used to self-help gurus and programs and buying books on self-reliance. But today we're going to be in the book of Isaiah, and we're going to see what God says about self-help and relying upon other people and trusting gurus and that sort of thing. We'll see what God's opinion is when we come right back. Hi, and welcome to Bible Study with Friends, where our goal is to help you get more impact from your Bible study. I'm here with my friend Jacob Curtis, and Jake and I are going to continue in our study in the book of Isaiah. Today we're in the 31st chapter, and we're going to be looking at another woe. This is the fifth woe out of 6 woes in this section of Isaiah. In last chapter and this chapter, both of these woes are about Egypt, but they're not aimed at Egypt. They're aimed at Israel about Egypt. Okay? So as we go here, we'll see the warning is really to Israel, but it happens to be about Egypt. I was talking in the introduction that we live in a culture of self-reliance and self-help and gurus and looking at other people and trusting in what people tell us. And that's what this chapter is about. So let's get into it and we'll start. All right?
Let's do it.
Now, I want you to compare. Look over at chapter 30, verse 1 to 5, and read from verse 1 to 5 of chapter 30.
Woe, stubborn children, declares the Lord, who carry out a plan, but not mine, and who make an alliance, but not of my spirit, that they may add to sin, who set out to go down to Egypt without asking my direction, to take refuge in the protection of Pharaoh, and to seek shelter in the shadow of Egypt. Therefore shall the protection of Pharaoh turn to your shame, and the shelter in the shadow of Egypt to your humiliation. For though his officials are at Zion, and his envoys reach Hanes, everyone comes to shame through a people that cannot profit them, that brings neither help nor profit, but shame and disgrace.
Now, we see a word there, help. We're going to talk a lot about that word today in this chapter. But what we saw was the woe of chapter 30 was about making plans to go to Egypt for help.
Oh, yeah.
You made plans to go without checking with me and what I want you to do. Now, this chapter starts out with a woe about actually going. So let's look at this. Starting at verse 1, read verse 1 and 2.
Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help, and rely on horses, and trust in chariots because they are many, and in horsemen because they are very strong. But do not look to the Holy One of Israel, nor seek the Lord. Yet he also is wise, and will bring disaster, and does not retract his words, but will arise against the house of evildoers, and against the help of the workers of iniquity.
All right, so we saw this word help start to show up. This is all prophecy, because we'll see will through this whole chapter. The idea of woe to those who actually go down to Egypt for help and rely on what Egypt has to offer as far as resources, right?
Yeah.
This would be like a lot like us who say, be careful where you go to put your trust in what's going to be a help to you. This idea of self-help. Now, when it says don't go down to Egypt for help and rely on horses, they had been specifically told once God brought them out of Egypt, they were not supposed to go back. I want you to flip over to Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 16, and see where Moses warns them that once they're out of Egypt, they're not supposed to go back. During the whole wilderness deal, they kept saying, oh, we ought to go back because they had soup there, they had stuff there, and they had water there. Moses is saying, no, once God has brought you out, don't go back to relying upon Egypt. So read Deuteronomy 17, 16.
Only he must not acquire many horses for himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt to acquire many horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again.
So this idea of once you're out, the idea is to trust in the Lord and not try to build up your cavalry and your army. And don't go back to Egypt and trust in their horses either. There's a specific warning in the scriptures not to go back to Egypt. Yet, that's exactly what Israel was planning because they were afraid of Assyria. God is saying, woe to you if you start trusting and going back to Egypt. Don't trust in the chariots because they're many, in the horses because they're strong. This is going back to the Egyptian army. They do not look to the Holy One of Israel nor seek the Lord. They're going to Egypt for help and not going to the Lord for help. Do you see that?
Yeah.
And there's
Yep.
a warning there. And that's a warning for us. When I start to get in trouble and I start to be afraid of what's happening around me, do I try to run back to the world that the Lord delivered me out of? Or do I trust in Him? And that's really what this chapter is about, trust. And we're going to see that as we go into these next verses, okay? Any observations?
I really like the first verse there was rely on horses and trust in chariots.
Yeah.
It's almost as if we need to be dependent and have faith in the Holy One of Israel.
Yeah. It's like trust and rely we should do that exactly to God. We
Right.
should trust in Him and rely on Him, not run back to human resources, right? Either my own resources or what the
Others.
world has to offer. And yet, so often running to God, trusting in God, and putting our trust and faith in God and relying on Him is the last thing we do. It's just the way it is. Okay. Now, verse 2, they capitalized it to help us out, talking about the Holy One of Israel, the Lord, right? He is wise and He will bring disaster and does not retract His words, but will arise against the house of evildoers and against the help of the workers of iniquity. If you go to Egypt for help, God is not going to go against His own word where He told him not to go, and He's going to judge and bring disaster on your plans to get help from Egypt. Now, verse 3, let's look at verse 3. Go ahead.
The Egyptians are men and not God, and their horses are flesh and not spirit. So the Lord will stretch out His hand, and he who helps will stumble, and he who is helped will fall. All of them will come to an end together.
All right, now you really see this help is used here. Help, helps, helped. Okay. And it's all based around this little phrase at the beginning of verse 3. Did you catch that? You're going to go down and put your trust in the Egyptians and in their horses. But look, the Egyptians are men and not God, and their horses are just flesh and not spirit. So there's going to be no significant spiritual help found in Egypt. And yet we do that all the time. I find that I want to put my trust in myself. I'm not God. I want to put my trust in friends, family, and circumstances. They're not God. I want to put my trust in things, and there's no spirit there. So it's something for us to think about is we're starting to see where am I putting my trust, or if I'm afraid of something, where am I putting my reliance for help? And that's really starting to be the theme here. All wrapped up in this will. God will take action. He who helps you look for workers of iniquity for help. And the one who tries to help will stumble. And he who is helped will fall. You're going to go there, and the people that try to help you, God is going to resist them. And the fact that you're helped, it might seem like you're helped, but it's only going to be temporary because you're going to fall. And all of them, and that's this, all of them includes Egypt and the people who go to Egypt, Israel, all of them will come to an end together. A lot of times we're relying and trusting in people that are just as lost as we are, if not more so. And
Yeah.
yet we want to take their advice. We want to take their lead and go with them for their help. And God says, no, you're relying on the wrong people. If you do rely on them for help, I'll make you stumble. You can't depend on anybody else other than God for ultimate help, right?
Yeah.
Now we go on. So he's building this case. The verse 4 starts out with the word for, and that basically because they're going to come to an end. Thus says the Lord to me. Then this is Isaiah speaking now. And he's saying, the Lord has told me, quit relying on Egypt. As the lion or the young lion growls over his prey, against which a band of shepherds is called out, and he will not be terrified at their voice, nor disturbed at their noise. Now, the Lord is going to take care of us, and all of the noise and growls coming out of Assyria is just noise. And a lion, that's this powerful lion, you can have shepherds coming out and yelling and all this stuff, and he will not be terrified at their voice, nor will he be disturbed at their noise. So will the Lord of hosts come down to wage war on Mount Zion and on its hill. Mount Zion is Jerusalem. On its hill is the Temple Mount.
No, okay.
So he's basically saying, God is going to come and fight for you if you trust in him. And he's not going to be afraid of Assyria. He's going to be like the lion who everybody yells at him, but he just ignores them because he's the powerful one. And then he goes like this, like flying birds or soaring birds, so the Lord of hosts will protect Jerusalem. He will protect and deliver it. He will pass over and rescue it. Did you really grasp what that's talking about?
I came to the same conclusion there in your notes. Birds don't really care what's happening around on the ground. Like they're gonna do what they need to do. That's how God's going to do what he needs to do to protect and
Yeah, and there's all kinds of verses in the Old Testament that talk about that God the Father will take Israel under his wing, like a bird protecting
like a
her
mama
chicks.
hen.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this idea that when the birds are flocking, they could care less what's going on the ground. You could be yelling, and the birds are just flying overhead. They could care less about the ground. And that's the way God's going to be. He's going to come down for victory, and he's going to come down like a lion. He's not going to be afraid of people yelling at him or threatening him. He's going to ignore that. And he's going to be like the birds that just ignore what's going on underneath and hover like a dome of protection over Israel.
Yeah. The imagery in these last few verses is really eye-opening about how a lion will protect its prey and the birds hovering. It's a very good word.
Yeah, and in both cases, a lot of verses that talk about God is a lion, the Lion of Judah. We hear about that all the time. But here he says, thus says the Lord to me, as a lion ignores people around him, so will the Lord of hosts come down and wage war. In other words, he's going to ignore all the people that are making noise against him. And he's going to be like these flying birds that protect and hover over Jerusalem. And it says in verse 5, the Lord of hosts will protect and deliver it, and he will pass over it and rescue it. So you don't need to go down to Egypt or trust in other things or other people for protection, because God will personally take care of you, and he will personally deliver and personally protect. Now it goes on. Verse 6 and 7, read those two, and we're going to talk about those two being related.
Return to him from whom you have deeply defected, O sons of Israel. For in that day every man will cast away his silver idols and his gold idols, which your sinful hands have made for you.
Now, this idea of, we've talked about this in Isaiah before, where God is judging and he's going to punish, but he always offers in the middle of this saying, God's going to fight for you. So come back to me, return to him, return to the Lord of hosts, whom you have deeply defected. This idea of, I have left God and relied upon Egypt or relied upon my own abilities or relied upon circumstances instead of relying upon God. I have deeply defected from him, but it's never too late. I want you to flip over to Hosea chapter 6, verse 1. This is never too late.
Let us return to the Lord, for he has torn us, that he may heal us. He has struck us down, and he will bind us up.
See that? God is going to punish Israel, and he'll
Yeah.
punish us when we defect from him. But he's always there. He's going to punish us, but fix us. He's going to nail us to the wall, but he's going to heal us if we repent to him. So it's never, ever too late to come to God for his protection. That's what it's saying there in Isaiah. It says, in that very day, every man will cast away his silver idols. This is judgment. Okay. Now, that day, this is the last time that day is mentioned until chapter 52. He's ending this section about judgment, talking about warnings about that day. And then he picks it all back up at the very end with the blessings of that day, which we'll get to in a while. But that's just an interesting little side. Every man will cast away his silver idols and his gold. And it just struck me, Jake, that there's no power or help in stuff, in idols. Idols are not going to help me. And at a point in time, I will realize that there's no help in idols. So then I thought, what are the idols in my life that my sinful hands are making? I just stopped and really thought about that for a while. We've talked about how your work can be an idol. Even your family can be an idol, where you worship it, you trust in it. I don't have to worry because I've got a good job and I trust in my job. Be careful that doesn't become an idol, because at a point in your life, you will realize that there's no power and there's no help in idols. So there's a good opportunity there for a little self-meditation on what are the idols in my life and what am I trusting in rather than trusting in God? Am I putting my trust in Egypt or some strong war horse instead of on the Lord God? And then we finish up. Now, this is finally God saying, you're worried about Assyria. This is what I'm going to do to Assyria. Read verse 8 and 9 now.
And the Assyrian will fall by a sword, not of man, and the sword not of men will devour him. He will not escape the sword, and his young men will become forced laborers. His flock will pass away because of panic, and his princes will be terrified at the standard, declares the Lord, who fires in Zion and whose furnace is in Jerusalem.
What is it talking about when it says Assyria will fall by a sword, not of man? He says that twice.
He's referring back to God, and God will take care of it and make it happen.
Okay. Flip ahead to chapter 37, verse 36 and 37.
And the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when the people arose early in the morning, behold, these were all dead bodies. Then the king of Assyria departed and returned home and lived at Nineveh.
He ran. Now, God is going to deliver not by the sword of a man, not by the sword of Egyptians, not by your sword. He is fully capable of delivering miraculously without using a man. That same thing is recorded again in 2 Kings chapter 19:35. We won't go there, but in 2 Kings chapter 19 and in Isaiah 37, both record this miraculous event of God through an angel in one night. And this idea that they become conquered, where they become forced laborers. They're slaves in defeat. That's typically what happens with defeated armies. His rock will pass away because of panic. In other words, his foundation, the Assyrian, is going to pass away because he's going to be panicked. His princes will be terrified at the standard of Israel, at the standard of God, declares the Lord. And then he says, declares the Lord, whose fire is in Zion and whose furnace is in Jerusalem. And that refers to the altar in Jerusalem. There was a flame that burned all the time. The priests kept this flame burning to remind the people that God was constantly with them. The same way as, remember in the wilderness, there was a fire that led them, and a cloud in the daytime, fire at night, that reminded them God was always with them. And Israel, Jerusalem, had a fire that was continually going, and that was supposed to remind people God is with you, and he's going to take care of you. He doesn't need the sword of a man. So don't trust in men. Don't trust in Egypt. Don't trust in politics. Don't trust in deliverance coming from somewhere, your own strength or somebody else's strength. Trust and rely on God, who is fully capable of protecting you like a young lion and a hovering flock of birds, and protect you against Assyria miraculously. And he does that. And Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, runs back to Nineveh and hides in Nineveh, and he is assassinated in Nineveh. And then Babylon takes over, and Babylon will come down as a whole different issue for Israel. And we'll see that in the next few chapters. Anyway, any comments, any observations about these 9 little verses?
I really like that imagery in verses 4 and 5 about who God is and what he does for us, and about being that lion who will protect and ignore everything else because he is God.
Yeah. I like that, the fact that, hey, Egypt is just a man, and the horses are nothing. There's no spirit.
Yeah.
They're not God. They're not spirit. God is God. God is spirit. And then I like that idea about he can deliver by a sword without a man.
God doesn't need us.
He is fully capable of taking care of us if we trust in him. It gives us a moment to think and pause and go, am I trusting in the Lord the way he desires me to trust in him? Or am I constantly seeking help from other sources? That's this word help. You get trust, rely, and help all through this chapter, saying, no, trust in God. He's the young lion. He's the flocking, protecting birds. And he'll deliver miraculously, not through any agency of a man. Today we've been talking about relying upon God and not relying upon ourselves, not trusting in things we have or things we can do, but trusting in God. I want to recommend a video to you. It's called Trusting God No Matter What. It's out of Habakkuk chapter 3, and I think you'll enjoy it. And if you do, be sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the like. That helps us a lot. We appreciate that. And listen, we're going to continue in our study next week. And until then, God bless you.